Full Moon Features is a production company with an interesting history that all started from the ashes of Empire Pictures. Empire Pictures was started in the early 1980s, but financial trouble and an interesting excursion that involved moving all of their production companies from the US to Italy meant that the company folded in 1988. The company's founder, Charles Band, returned to the US that same year and set up a new company, Full Moon Entertainment, later Full Moon Features, to effectively start again and attempt to produce B-movie pictures that retained a big-budget aesthetic. Depending on how you define big budget, Full Moon have either done tremendously well or have failed fundamentally to really achieve what they wanted. They do, however, have a real knack for creating film titles and premise that would really make you curious to actually want to watch what they produce. With titles such as The Ginger Dead Man, Evil Bong, and Demonic Toys, you pretty much know what you're getting yourself into with this film company. Full Moon are very much all about their franchises, and their first one was arguably one of their best. Puppet Master is a 1989 supernatural horror film written by Charles Band and directed by David Schmoeller. If franchise films are the thing that you're into, then look no further than this series, which has some 14 direct and indirect sequels to its original film, 2 of which are listed on Wikipedia as in production right now. Its series spans almost 30 years, and depending on where you choose to start, there seems to be 2 or 3 established jumping on points at this point. The main premise of the film is that during World War II, a puppeteer discovers the secret of how to give life to inanimate objects, and begins making and giving life to several puppets who he cherishes as if they were his own children. The Nazis are interested in harnessing this power as it effectively acts as a form of border immortality, and so seeking a quick escape from having to tell them, he escapes Nazi Germany and holds up in a hotel in California. The Nazis track him down, however, but before they can capture him, he places all his living creations in a trunk, hides them behind a fake wall in the hotel, and then commits suicide, taking his secret with him. Almost 50 years later, a group of psychics are summoned to the hotel as one of their team has died, and there are several unexplained incidents happening around the hotel grounds. The team is led by Frank and Alex, played respectively by Matt Rowe and Paul Le Mat, and as soon as they arrive it becomes very clear that everything is not as it would seem. A good chunk of the film's narrative is shown through flashbacks, with Alex and his teammate Carissa having several visions throughout the course of the film, some of which play out exactly as they happen, and others which happen slightly different as a direct result of them becoming aware that something like what they see may actually have happened or will happen. What is nice about this film, however, is the idea that all the psychics have slightly different abilities and strengths, with Alex's visions being stronger than Carissa's, but Carissa having the ability to discover the entire history and life of an object through touch alone. It really helps that the script comes across as purposefully melodramatic at times, and I think that really helps smooth over some of the rougher dialogue exchanges. It's by no means a masterpiece of a script, but it's fun and lightweight. The characters aren't particularly well fleshed out, but they're dry and quite witty and just fun to be around. I could quite happily have just watched a series of these psychics travelling around and solving mysteries like Scooby-Doo. They're entertaining, and all of them give a very strong performance as their characters, though obviously the melodrama helps again tremendously, because if they do have any wobbles, it could just be seen as being within the nature of the film.
Miss Megan. There's a question that's been burning inside of me. Did it ever pass through your sweet, innocent little mind that your husband just possibly married you for your money?
A little bit of sauce and Dana becomes quite the cynic, doesn't she?
I'm not a cynic, Frank. I prefer to think of myself as a nasty bitch.
That's enough, Dana.
Fuck you, you Ivy League tight ass. But who's kidding who? We all know why we're here. So why continue the pitiful charade for the grieving widow?
There are some very lavish set designs in this film as well. The hotel, where we spend a massive chunk of the film, oozes a richness that was very refreshing. It has a tremendous level of scale to it for what is effectively one of the first films this new company made. And while there are some cheap-looking set elements, they're mercifully few and far between. In fact, most of this film feels quite big budget and lavish, which is astounding considering its $400,000 budget. It's no Titanic, but it is impressive for what it is. The direction is nice and solid with a good range of diversity in actor placement and performance, a nice choice of location usage, and a solid use of props and set work that only amplifies the great location usage. The cinematography is very solid as well for its time, with some very interesting uses of shots and composition that really drive up the horror elements, with decent cutaways acting as a way to make the goriness seem even worse than it is, whilst also giving it a decent artistic flair. Though I will admit there are moments in this film that would appear to have been cribbed directly from Child's Play 1 and 2. Particularly in the puppet shots, which in many ways directly mirror the movement style of Chucky in the first two Child's Play films. The use of lighting and colour is something I also absolutely have to mention, as the lighting is very impressive in giving a hazy yet rich vibe throughout, and contrasting that, when it gets to the more horror-filled elements, it can sharply turn atmospheric and striking. There's some very reasonable special effects throughout this film, and for 1989 with a low to mid budget, the stop motion animation and the way the puppets move is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, there are a couple of shaky bits here and there, but I couldn't count more than 3 in the whole 90+ minute feature. The puppets themselves also come across as somewhat likeable. They're mute for the most part, short of the odd gasp, but the script really gives them the opportunity to emote. And I think the filmmakers very much understood that getting the puppets on the side of the audience as a sort of anti-hero role would be key to this film being a success or a flop. The soundtrack is for me a game of two halves. On the one hand, it sounds gorgeous with incredible compositions that really complement all of the other elements of the film very well. However, it's entirely synth-based, and it really dates the film. I can appreciate, though, that this is a soundtrack of its time, but I would love to see this soundtrack transcribed by an orchestra at some point. Puppet Master was released on Blu-ray by 88 Pictures in 2012, and while extras on this release would have appeared to have been transferred over from an older DVD copy, the print quality of this film is fairly decent. There are a few print faults present throughout, including the odd hair and a couple of stains on the film itself, but I have to assume that these were irreparable, as the rest of the print's quality is really quite nice, with decent colour grading and a crisp, clean sharpness that really brings out the film grain. Puppet Master is a quite campy slice of the late 80s. It's out of the mould of films like Child's Play 2 and Halloween 3. It dances that line between being a macabre horror with comedy elements and more traditional gothic slasher films, but it never quite lands in either. It has a lot of elements that are really going for it, and what they've achieved with their budget is astounding. When the credits rolled on this film, I was left feeling like I'd only really watched the opening act of a much grander film, rather than something that could have been quite self-contained. As a result of this, I was left feeling like this was a rather well-made and thoughtful but fluffy film. Something that would kill an hour and a half in an entertaining and fun way, but not necessarily something I would grab straight out of the gate. If the intention of the filmmakers from the off was to expand on this film in sequels, then I look forward to seeing how this universe shapes out. But as a standalone feature, it was satisfying and the very definition of the word cult. It's a fun, well-made little horror film with a lot of good elements working for it, and I'd definitely say check it out.